Joining me now in the Cipher Brief studio is Gilman Louie. Gilman is a co-founder and managing partner at America's Frontier Fund. He is also the former CEO of In-Q-Tel. He sits on a number of advisory boards when it comes to national security and technology. Gilman, welcome. It's nice to see you.
It's great to see you again, Suzanne.
So we've had some time now to digest the initial sort of whatever you want to call it of DeepSeek, which sent panic through the markets. I think a lot of panic initially until people started to kind of pull this AI platform apart and see what it could and couldn't do. What is your take now that we've had a chance to learn a little bit more about this in terms of how much of a threat this is to U.S. national security?
I think we got to start at a high level of how we got here in the first place, right? So the U.S. advantage has always been its technical base and the use of certain tools that we had in national security to restrict flows of technologies overseas, particularly to a place like China. And so in the analysis in the prior administration, the focus was on restriction of capabilities, particularly around microelectronics, right? So on one hand, the U.S. tech companies, 4 to 5 major AI companies are in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's kind of interesting to point that out. But if you look at what took place, it was, okay, we have the chips, they don't, right? We have the latest generations, the B100s, they have the H100, they have limited supplies, and we don't. And we can build our foundational compute capabilities around an abundance of chips. We basically, last week they announced $500 billion going into, new server farms and new capabilities. And that was just one cohort of companies, not all the cohort of companies. So that was seen as our ability to keep the advantage. Now, what's interesting is anybody in engineering knows, scarcity creates a different kind of innovation. So to some of us, it wasn't a surprise that another group of talented engineers and scientists could come up with a different cut on the problem to solve a class of compute with far less compute. Not that different than in national security when the U.S. had huge computational advantage, the Soviets had to invest in algorithms. So they became very good at creating algorithms because they didn't have access to compute, right? Fast forward 60, 70 years later, same thing just happened in China. Okay, so want to point that out is so like if we had a different environment where they didn't have the scarcity, they might not have gotten to that solution. And because we have abundance, there is no incentive to solve for scarcity. Now,
that's a really interesting take on that. So the scarcity of the materials they needed to launch this is really driving more innovation on behalf of China. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, particularly on things like algorithms and mathematical approaches to go off and solve these classes of problems. Now, the reality, as people have unpacked this thing, is that the current implementation of DeepSeek, at least from an algorithmic point of view, is a momentary advantage. Any great engineer, all they need to know is if she can look across the way and say, you may not show me your trick, but I know it is now a solvable problem. We have smart people who will solve that problem. And you combine that with open source. It means that that performance gap of what I can do with far less computing, right, will level itself off. Now the market's panicked because it's, oh my God, we don't need as many NVIDIA chips, right? Like NVIDIA, right? We don't need all these server farms, and let's go in the opposite direction.
And some people did.
But in the history of compute, whenever there's been a computational breakthrough in performance or price, name a moment in history where that resulted in less compute. The demand for compute will go up because of this, because what this will result in is accessibility. So in the old world, if you weren't, one of the big 5 AI companies, right? It was very, very difficult to see yourself competing on world-class applications if you didn't have billions of dollars of investment to compete against them.
Yeah.
DeepSeek has shown that you don't need that. So you got to, it's kind of funny, it's coming from China. In some ways, you're getting a democratization of AI innovation because of this new price performance breakthrough. And it's coming from China, it's not coming from the US. To the point where the former CEO of Intel, Pat Gelsinger, announced in his new AI startup, he's going to use DeepSeek. The former CEO of Intel, which enjoyed billions of dollars of investments from CHIPS Act on the argument of national security, now it's going to benefit from using technology built in another country because of scarcity.
Mm-hmm. It's not how you really saw this story going, is it?
Well,
it's fascinating.
The reality is, we are so early in the AI. This is just a blip.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cipher Brief's NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsekedge.com.
You know, I asked you the last time we spoke, Gilman, how we were talking broadly about this tech race between the US and China, particularly when it comes to national security. And I asked you, what are going to be the indicators? How are we going to know? Because everyone wants to talk about, are we winning? Are we behind? Are we winning? Are we behind? And I asked what you're looking at. And the first thing you said was, watch the commercial market. How do you feel about that today?
I think the speed in which AI companies and application companies are growing, right? Like 30 a day, that's going to start accelerating, right?
Wow.
So now it's a slightly different race. And this is a real dilemma for the United States. Mm-hmm. Is the bias is going to be a bias for action. So prior to kind of this recent set of breakthroughs, everybody was worried about AI security, AI safety, ethical issues around AI. Are we going too fast? Should we slow down? Right? We have petitions that people are saying we need to go slower. Right? We need to be more thoughtful. Countries, nation states, right? Whole alliances like the EU, who says, we need to have conferences. The French want to lead this discussion. The U.S., even the Department of Defense, we want to have the discussion. Now, because of accessibility, there is now definitely a race. And that race means that if you go too slow, using the old models and the old techniques because you're kind of inhibiting innovation, the other team may run right by you. Mm-hmm. And you, the next time around, may not be able to catch them. And so you're going to see a logarithmic increase of AI-powered applications around large language models using this new framework that DeepSeek has, whether you use DeepSeek or somebody has an alternative version of that. Mm-hmm. That's an accelerate growth because it's available and it can be everywhere. And that will change how we even think about where AI computes. Mm-hmm. Because if you need smaller models, less computation, it means that potentially you can do more computation on the edge, which also changes the power equation quite a bit if I don't have to go to the cloud.
Yeah, right. That'll be a whole separate conversation. All right. Let me ask you something else quickly. President Trump ordered the creation of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. That news just recently broke. And, you are the CEO and co-founder, I believe, of In-Q-Tel all those years ago, Gilman, when the CIA realized that it could get into the venture capital market as a way to spur innovative ideas for solutions that would help government with a lot of the problem sets that they had. Also be dual facing. It would have some commercial applications. You came from the commercial sector. So I really wanted to get your thoughts on, sort of how these sovereign wealth funds work in general and kind of what are they created to intend to address, whether they're able to do it or not is a separate question.
I think on the earlier statement about In-Q-Tel, it's hard to imagine it took place 25 years ago.
Yeah.
It's 25 years ago, and most of the experts, including most of the board members, with people like Bill Perry and Norm Augustine, and Michael Crow. By the way, Michael Crow gets more credit because he was actually the first CEO of In-Q-Tel, not me.
I thought you were. You could have gotten away with that.
He hired me, but he came
Okay.
first, and Michael is still chairman. And it made us think differently about how venture capital can play a role in national security. AFF is a byproduct of that, getting capital from the Office of Strategic Capital from the Department of Defense as a major investor. So that tradition continues. This new announcement, right, is an important one. And it's a realization that globally sovereign wealth funds, the ability to leverage anywhere from $500 billion to $2 trillion to invest in innovation, right, is now a new engine that fuels innovation. And if you look at the US, well, we've been very, very advantaged in the last software revolution. The next technical revolution around frontier technologies is going to require deep tech investing. And deep tech investing requires a different kind of investment profiles. And you have to have much more patient limited partners. Limited partners are people who invest in venture funds.
Yeah.
Sovereign wealth funds are a method for nation states to support that set of activity. And so the US is at a huge disadvantage when you compare it against the Netherlands or Saudi Arabia or the Chinese, or even a country like Singapore, which has more than one, or even Australia with the superannuation funds, right? Venture funds listen to that international LP base more than they listen to the US, simply because the US is not in the game. And if the US is going to win and maintain its innovation advantages, right, it needs to find a method to provide the necessary risk capital to invest in things that allows America to build again, right? Not just innovate, but to actually build. And that entire supply chain of infrastructure requires a different kind of investment. Now, there's two parts of this, right? The difference between a sovereign wealth fund and, an initiative is initiatives are, we put money into, right, the public sector or the private sector, and we hope that that would stimulate growth. We put a lot of money through stimulus in the last handful of years. The reality is you're giving money away. There's nothing that comes back. What other nation states have realized is if you use the sovereign wealth fund model and you do it right, you actually have professional managers who know how to manage funds, and you invest in good funds and good projects and programs, they'll have a return on investment. And that return on investment not only pays back the original investment, but it sets the table for future generations. So it is a tool that the U.S. needs to have, and I think the Trump administration rightly identified that this is a different way of allocating resources to fund innovation that ultimately could have a payoff, not just in keep the U.S. ahead in the technology race, but actually economic benefits for future generation of Americans if these funds are invested properly.
And that was, a lesson also from your In-Q-Tel experience, I think, as well, right? Because what you realized is you're making a lot of money, and that was an okay problem to have.
Yes, in fact, there was a little bit of worry when In-Q-Tel was being constructed that we would have catastrophic success. Catastrophic success is that, you do a company and it, has this huge rate of return. What do you do with it? And In-Q-Tel had a great agreement with the Congress and the CI that money gets invested to support innovation, not direct investments. But, you look at Palantir. I did Palantir as one of my last deals when I left In-Q-Tel back in the early 2000s. And today, Palantir is worth more than Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, which I think obviously a lot of people didn't see coming at the time, but some did.
Some did.
And they're also seeing a big return.
Yeah.
Gilman, what else top of mind for you as you look forward? I mean, to the next couple of weeks, months. We're in a new administration. There's been a lot of very fast change very quickly. What are you looking for?
Well, a few things, right? Let's start with the department. We'll just go to the IC next. Look, for us to be able to, as the new Secretary of Defense says that he wants lethality to increase, our ability to project power, right? To be able not just to project it, but actually actuate it if we actually get ourselves into that fight. Mm-hmm. Given the speed of innovation, particularly the capacity of a country like China, we have to rethink about not only the tools that we use if we get ourselves into a fight, but how we build it. Mm-hmm. The U.S. has always had, since World War II, a manufacturing advantage over our adversaries. In many cases, take a country like Germany in World War II, in many ways, they were more advanced than we were, but they did not have the capacity to manufacture at the rate necessary to sustain a long fight, and the U.S. did. Mm-hmm. If we get ourselves into a bad situation with a nation state like China, and hopefully we do not, our ability to sustain is more important than just the shiny tool that we're going to bring, the shiny weapon that we're going to bring into the fight. We're learning that in the Ukraine right now. I think in order for us to do that transformation, it means that there's going to be pain in the department because we have to stop doing programs. We can't continue to spend the rate that we're doing. We're going to be spending close to $1 trillion in this next budget on the Department of Defense. Mm-hmm. And the question is, with all that money we're spending, while we have certain strategic and tactical advantages over our competitors, right? Our competitors are quickly catching us, in some areas surpassing us in things like hypersonics. Mm-hmm. And we need to rethink that equation. I think from an intelligence point of view, I think AI changes everything. Yeah, AI is going to change autonomy in the defense quite a bit and how we think about warfare. But how we understand what other nations' intent is either against the U.S. or understand how they think about the U.S., right? The old model, kind of very sequential of, tasking and collection and processing and dissemination, that model is a very old model, right? That was built for a different time in a different era where we were organized around tools of collection rather than tools of knowledge. And so the IC, if it wants to maintain its relevance in the world, not only needs to do a better job in sensing what's happening around the world, it needs to be able to process it in a way where the information gives us information advantage, decision advantage, by whether it's a warfighter, the President of the United States, a principal, whoever we're supporting in the IC, we need to rethink the equation.
Yeah. I would love to see your blueprint on how you think that equation needs to play out, because it makes perfect sense when you think about it. And it is an older model of collection in the intelligence community that they have relied on to inform policymakers of decisions. But understanding where we are now and how you might map that out differently would be fascinating. Gilman Louie, thank you so much for taking just a few minutes. I feel like we're going to continue this conversation regularly throughout the year. I hope we do. You are the co-founder, managing partner of America's Frontier Fund, and it's always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
Look forward to future conversations. Thanks a lot, Suzanne.